The Alaskan Wilderness, 1985. A vast, silent expanse where the ancient forest holds its breath and the moon itself bleeds crimson. My name is Kale, and for the past few months this lonely perch atop the Raven's Tooth Fire Tower has been my entire world. It was 1985, and the Alaskan wilderness stretched out before me, an endless tapestry of deep greens and shadowed valleys. I'd sought this solitude, this grand isolation, a respite from the clamor of the world below. My tower, a simple wooden structure with walls of glass, felt like a crow's nest on an ancient ship, a fragile sentinel above an untamed sea of trees. Inside it was Spartan, a narrow cot, a desk groaning under the weight of an old, clunky typewriter, a two-burner stove, and a single hard-backed chair. But the windows, those glorious windows, offered a panoramic sweep of a beauty so raw, so utterly untouched, it could bring a man to his knees. The first few weeks were a dream. I fell into a rhythm dictated by the sun and the silent movements of the wildlife. My days were a meditative vigil, my gaze perpetually sweeping the horizon, waiting for the telltale whisper of smoke that would signal a forest fire. I watched the sun traverse the sky, painting it with hues I'd never imagined possible, observed the trees sway and dance with the breeze, and tracked the unhurried routines of caribou and bears, utterly oblivious to my quiet observation. Evenings were for meticulous reports, typed out with painstaking care, and the dog-eared novels I'd brought for company, stories of human dramas that now seemed laughably distant. It was a purity I hadn't known existed, a balm to a soul weary of the world. Then, the fourth week arrived, bringing with it a subtle shift in the air, a whisper of unease that coiled beneath the surface of my peace. It started late one summer night. I was hunched over my desk, the rhythmic clack of the typewriter a familiar comfort, when a prickle of something different traced its way up my spine. It was a sensation of being watched, not by a curious fox or a watchful hawk, but by something far more profound, more ancient. It was a subtle pressure, a quiet hum in the vast silence. I stood, stretching out the kinks in my back, and moved to the nearest window, the moon. It hung impossibly low that night, so close it felt as if I could reach out and pluck it from the velvet sky. But it wasn't the familiar silver orb. Its hue was a deep, intense crimson, bleeding across the night, casting an eerie, blood-red glow over the landscape below. The forest, bathed in this alien light, transformed into a startlingly vibrant, almost terrifying shade of red. It was breathtaking, yes, beautiful in a haunting, primal sort of way, but it also sent a ripple of pure dread through me. The world outside my tower had become something else entirely, a realm I didn't recognize. "Kale, you there?" A voice crackled through the radio, pulling me sharply from my trance. It was Sam, my supervisor, stationed in Anchorage, a man of gruff pragmatism and one of the few voices that punctured my isolation. I picked up the receiver, my fingers surprisingly steady. "This is Kale. Go ahead, Sam. How's the night out there? Anything burning?" I glanced back at the ominously low-hanging moon, its crimson gaze seeming to pierce through the glass. "Different," I replied, the word tasting strange on my tongue. There was a beat of silence. "Different how, Kale? You seeing things?" His tone was laced with a hint of amusement, the kind reserved for city folk trying to make sense of the wilderness. "Well, Sam, you ever seen the moon sit so low? And this color, it's like blood." My gaze remained locked on the surreal spectacle. Another pause, longer this time. "Can't say that I have, Kale. Don't let it spook you. It's just the light, atmospheric trickery." His voice was light, dismissive, the sound of a man who couldn't possibly grasp the chilling ambience the crimson moonlight was casting over my isolated world. "Spooked?" "Nah," I tried to match his easy tone, but inside something stirred, a primal instinct screaming that something was deeply, profoundly wrong. I was no longer listening to Sam. My eyes, drawn by an invisible thread, had caught a flicker of movement at the far edge of the forest. Two pinpricks of light, reflecting the moon's crimson glow, pulsed red against the dark undergrowth. They were fixated on the tower, fixated on me. "Sam, I'll call you back," I muttered into the radio, the words barely formed. My eyes never left those two glowing dots. I stepped back from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs. I'd seen animal eyes reflecting light before, the curious glint of a deer or the sharp sparkle of a wolf caught in a flashlight beam. But this was different. These were not the curious, skittish eyes of a forest creature. They were intent, focused, and almost predatory. With a shaky breath, I retreated fully from the window, moving out of sight. My skin tingled with a sudden jolt of adrenaline, a cold wave of fear and a strange, morbid fascination warring within me. The night passed without further incident, but sleep was a mocking illusion. The image of those glowing red eyes had been burned into my mind, a brand on my waking thoughts. The first light of dawn brought a fragile sense of relief. I brewed a strong pot of coffee, its robust aroma a grounding force, and surveyed the forest. In the clear light of morning, it seemed to have returned to normal, the unsettling crimson haze replaced by familiar greens and browns. I tried to shake off the lingering unease, to rationalize it as a trick of the light, a symptom of solitude. I needed to chop some wood for the stove. Routine was a lifeline. Selecting my axe, I headed down the tower steps. The morning air was crisp, clean, tingling against my skin. I walked towards a small fir tree at the edge of the clearing, a healthy specimen perfect for kindling. A few quick practice swings, the axe whistling through the air. I brought it down, a satisfying thud as the blade bit deep. The tree shuddered, and a dark, viscous liquid began to seep from the cut. I paused, axe mid-swing, staring at the unnatural sight. Sap, I thought, but unlike any sap I had ever seen. It was deep, dark red, almost the color of fresh blood, and it dribbled sluggishly down the trunk, staining the vibrant green moss at the base. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly, and dipped one into the flow. It was thick, sticky, definitely not the usual clear, amber resin I was accustomed to. It had a strange, metallic smell, oddly reminiscent of old pennies. I rubbed it between my fingers. It was warm, smooth, almost oily. I took a step back, a feeling of surrealism washing over me, cold and unsettling. First, the low-hanging crimson moon and the glowing red eyes. Now, a bleeding tree. I left the tree as it was, the axe still embedded in its trunk, and returned to the tower, my hands empty, my mind swirling with unsettling thoughts. As evening approached, the strange incidents of the day weighed heavy on me. The image of the tree, bleeding sap as dark as blood, lingered, an unsettling smudge on my peace. I found myself restless, pacing the small space of the lookout tower, my gaze constantly drawn to the dimming wilderness outside, my apprehension mounting with every fading ray of light. The sun dipped below the horizon, and twilight was quickly swallowed by a deep, impenetrable darkness. Tonight, the forest felt more alive than ever, the nocturnal creatures beginning their nightly chorus. The rustling of unseen leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the faint scuttle of unseen creatures. But underlying it all, I felt a sense of anticipation, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Then, the moon rose again, hanging heavy and low in the night sky, its crimson glow transforming the forest into an ethereal, nightmare landscape. It felt like a spotlight directed at me at the tower, a beacon in the vast, waiting expanse of wilderness. And there they were again, the glowing red eyes appearing at the edge of the forest. They were closer tonight, and the red glow was more intense, as if silently commanding my gaze. The eyes swiveled toward the tower, towards me. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, a chill creeping down my spine. They were not just watching me anymore. They were moving, slowly, methodically, making their way toward the tower. My heart pounded in my chest as I quickly locked the tower door. I kept my eyes trained on the approaching presence, the ominous glow growing stronger, closer. A primal fear swelled within me, an instinct screaming at me to hide, to run, but there was nowhere to go. The entity stopped a few yards away from the tower, still just a pair of glowing red eyes in the dark. It seemed to be studying me, its unblinking gaze never leaving the tower. It stayed there for what felt like an eternity, a silent, chilling sentinel. Finally, as the first faint light of dawn started to bleed into the sky, the eyes disappeared, melting away into the receding darkness, leaving behind an unsettling silence. I was left standing at the window, the bitter taste of fear still sharp in my mouth, staring out at the now empty spot where the entity had stood. Questions whirled around in my head like leaves caught in a storm. Each one more unsettling than the last. The following day greeted me with a sky as clear as crystal, but with a chill in the air that seemed to hold the remnants of last night's terror. Despite the fear that gnawed at my mind through the long, sleepless night, I decided to stick to my routine. I needed to check on the tree I'd tried to chop down yesterday, and perhaps attempt to cut a new one. With a determined, almost defiant stride, I ventured out towards the tree line, axe in hand. As I approached the tree from yesterday, I saw that the dark red sap was still trickling from the cuts in its trunk, staining the ground beneath. I couldn't help but touch it again, half expecting it to have turned back into regular sap, but it was still there, warm and viscous. A rustle in the underbrush caught my attention. I turned, expecting to see a squirrel or a bird. Instead, I found myself looking into the eyes of a deer. Its eyes, which should have been a gentle brown, were glowing bright red, much like the mysterious entity from the night before. I froze, the sight of the deer stopping me in my tracks. It wasn't alone. A rabbit peeked out from the underbrush, its eyes glowing the same unnerving red. A raven fluttered down from a nearby branch, landing overhead, its eyes a pair of red beacons, staring down at me. The forest was eerily quiet, save for the frantic pounding of my own heartbeat. I took a step back, my hand dropping the axe. The animals didn't move, didn't run away as they usually would. They just watched me, their red eyes unwavering, unblinking, feeling a terrifying mix of fear and an almost morbid fascination. I slowly backed away from the tree, from the animals, and returned to the tower. The forest, once a place of peace and solitude, had become something alien, something profoundly unknown. As I climbed back up to the tower, the unease from the night before returned, stronger than ever, tightening its icy grip around my chest. Back inside the precarious safety of the tower, I found my hands shaking slightly as I reached for the radio. I dialed the frequency, desperately needing to reach Sam. "Sam, you there?" I asked, my voice sounding oddly shaky in the quiet tower. There was a brief pause before I heard Sam's gruff voice come over the static. "Yeah, Kale, I'm here." "What's up, Sam?" I began, taking a deep, shuddering breath to steady my voice. "I need you to listen, okay? I need you to really listen to what I'm about to say." There was another pause, then Sam's voice, sounding slightly bemused. "Okay, Kale, you've got my attention. What's going on?" I gripped the radio tighter, as if the physical contact could somehow lend me the strength to articulate the surreal, terrifying experiences I'd been having. "It started with the moon," I started, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's been hanging low, lower than I've ever seen it, and it's not its usual color. It's crimson, Sam, like blood." Silence from the other end. For a moment I feared I'd lost connection. Then Sam's voice crackled back to life, disbelief already creeping into his tone. "A red moon, huh, could be an atmospheric thing. Dust or something." I cut him off before he could finish, urgency seeping into my voice. "That's not all, Sam. The trees, they're bleeding. I tried to cut one down and it oozed dark red sap. And the animals, their eyes are red." Again, silence greeted me. I could practically hear the gears turning in Sam's head, trying to make sense of what I was telling him, trying to reconcile it with his mundane reality. "And then there's something out there, Sam," I added, my voice dropping to a whisper. "It comes at night, glowing red eyes in the dark. It's been watching me, every night." Sam's voice came back, disbelief now evident, tinged with concern. "Kale, are you sure you're okay out there? You've been alone for weeks. It plays tricks on your mind, you know." "I'm not crazy, Sam," I retorted, a flicker of raw annoyance cutting through my fear. "Something's happening here. The forest, it's changing." Sam chuckled, a deep, warm sound that would usually put me at ease, but not today. Kale, you've been out there alone for a while now. It's normal to see things differently. Take a deep breath, son. Not imagining things, I insisted, but there was a tremor in my voice that betrayed my own creeping uncertainty, a desperate plea for validation against the overwhelming strangeness. Sam was silent for a moment before he replied, softer now. Look, Kale, why don't you take the rest of the day off? Get some rest, and remember it's just a forest, nothing more. With that he signed off, leaving me alone once more in the tower. I sat there, staring at the radio, his dismissive words echoing in my head. As the crimson moon ascended once again, casting its ominous glow over the landscape, I found myself unable to sleep. I couldn't shake off the disturbing encounters of the day, nor the disbelieving tone in Sam's voice. A mounting dread tightened its grip. It's coming back tonight. I was sure of it, and just as the thought crossed my mind, I spotted the familiar red glow at the edge of the forest. There they were, the pair of red eyes glowing brighter against the blood-red backdrop of the moon. But tonight they weren't alone. There was a silhouette accompanying the eyes, a form slowly materializing from the shadows. It was tall, standing at least 7 feet, humanoid, but there was something profoundly wrong with its proportions. Its arms were too long, its body too thin, almost gaunt. Its head, if it had one, turned upwards toward the tower, and I instinctively stepped back, but I couldn't look away. I saw its face, or rather, the terrifying absence of one. There were no discernible features, save for the glowing red eyes. It was like looking into a void, a swirling darkness that absorbed all light. As I watched from the relative safety of the tower, the entity started moving, its movements unnervingly smooth and silent. It didn't walk. Rather, it seemed to glide, covering the ground between the forest and the tower with an unnatural ease. For a brief moment, it stopped right underneath the tower, its gaze fixed upward, piercing through the wooden floor, through the very planks beneath my feet and through me. It was as though it could see right into my soul, into the frantic beat of my heart. It stayed there for a while, watching, waiting. Then, as abruptly as it arrived, the entity retreated, its form dissolving into the darkness as it receded back into the forest. The glowing eyes were the last to disappear, a haunting reminder of its presence that lingered in the dark, etched into my sight. Left alone once more, I collapsed onto my cot, the image of the faceless entity seared into my mind. The sun dipped below the horizon, and I watched the vibrant blues and greens of the day surrender to the deepening crimson hues of the approaching night. My heart raced, not with anticipation but with a cold, paralyzing fear. I knew what was coming, and for the first time since I started this job, I dreaded the night. But a new thought had begun to crystallize in my mind, a desperate resolve. I couldn't live in fear, hiding in this tower every night. I needed answers. I needed to face whatever it was that lurked in the shadows. Inside the tower, I prepared myself. I picked up my heavy-duty flashlight, switched it on, testing the bright, piercing beam against the floor. Then I grabbed the flare gun. It was an old model, issued as a standard part of the emergency kit for the watchtower, never meant to be used against whatever that thing was, but it was the only weapon I had. I checked the flare gun, ensuring it was loaded. I had a single shot. I didn't even know what I was hoping to achieve, only that I couldn't simply wait for it to come to me anymore. As darkness finally engulfed the landscape, I watched the forest. I waited, my eyes scanning the edge for the familiar red glow. And sure enough, it appeared. The pair of red eyes glowing bright against the deepening darkness, accompanied by the tall, ominous silhouette. But tonight, I wasn't going to hide. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and the flare gun, took a deep, shuddering breath and stepped out onto the tower's narrow balcony. There it was, looking up at me. It was watching, waiting. I couldn't help but shiver, not from the cold, but from the fear that snaked its way up my spine. A cold, predatory thing. My heart thundered in my chest as I took one last, desperate look at the relative safety of the tower. Then, mustering every bit of courage I had left, I began to descend the steps. Each step brought me closer to the entity. I could feel its gaze on me, an unsettling, unwavering focus that seemed to pierce through the darkness. It was watching me approach, making no move to retreat, to approach, or to react in any way. I was a few yards away now, the tower a towering silhouette behind me, and the entity, a dark, faceless presence, before me. This was it. With a determined stride, I stepped onto the crimson-tinged ground. The entity was now only a few paces away. I could see it clearly now. Its faceless form, its impossibly elongated arms, and those haunting, depthless red eyes. Holding my breath, I raised my flashlight, shining a direct, piercing beam of light at it. The beam sliced through the darkness, illuminating the entity. It didn't react, remaining eerily still, even as the harsh light washed over it. Up close, it was even more unnerving. Its form seemed to shift and ripple like an illusion, a wavering mirage on the edge of reality. It seemed less a solid being and more a concentration of the shadows and the crimson light itself. Ignoring the chill of pure fear crawling up my spine, I raised my free hand, the one holding the flare gun. I could see it, the towering figure shrouded in darkness, its crimson eyes locked on me. The flashlight trembled in my hand, my own fear betraying me. "Can you understand me?" I called out, my voice cracking slightly, echoing through the silent forest, a desperate plea into the void. The entity didn't respond, didn't even stir, but it didn't retreat either. "I don't want to hurt you," I continued, swallowing down the lump in my throat, the words feeling futile and childish against its ancient presence. "I just want to understand. What are you? Why are you here?" Still, there was no response, just the unblinking crimson eyes staring back at me, a silent, all-encompassing gaze. The silence stretched on, becoming a palpable presence between us, thick and heavy. It felt like standing at the precipice of a chasm, waiting for the inevitable fall. I clenched the flare gun tighter in my hand, my fingers trembling, but I tried to steady my grip. I took one last breath, feeling the cold Alaskan air filling my lungs. There was a moment of hesitation, a split second where I questioned if I was doing the right thing, if this was a fatal mistake. But then, the entity shifted. Its form rippled in the harsh light of the flashlight, a subtle, almost imperceptible undulation. It felt like a silent provocation, a dare, or perhaps a warning. It was enough to shatter my doubt. With a newfound, desperate resolve, I pulled the trigger of the flare gun. The gun kicked back, a roar breaking the profound silence as the flare soared through the air. It arced, a bright streak of searing red, a desperate beacon in the vast darkness before it descended, heading straight for the entity. The blinding light from the flare illuminated the surrounding area, turning the forest into a grotesque stage of stark reds and deep blacks. The forest watched in silent, eerie anticipation as the flare neared its target. And then, with a burst of blinding light and intense heat, the flare hit the entity. The surrounding night was lit up momentarily, turning the forest into a surreal spectacle of crimson and shadow. As the light from the flare dimmed, I squinted through the dissipating smoke, my heart hammering against my ribs. I held my breath, waiting to see the aftermath of my desperate action. The air was thick with the acrid scent of the spent flare. The entity stood there, utterly unaffected. The flare seemed to have done nothing more than create a temporary light show, a fleeting moment of artificial dawn. But there was something different now. The entity was no longer still. It stirred, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a fresh wave of terror down my spine. Suddenly, the entity's glowing eyes seemed to burn brighter, an internal, piercing red gaze that locked onto me with an unnerving intensity. In the terrifying silence of the aftermath, I realized that the entity hadn't retreated. Instead, it began to move toward me. As I stood there, the spent flare gun feeling suddenly useless in my hand, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd just made a grave, irreversible mistake. As the entity began to move, gliding towards me with that smooth, silent motion, a cold shiver of absolute terror ran down my spine. Every instinct screamed at me to turn, to run back to the relative safety of the tower, but something kept me rooted to the spot. The flashlight and empty flare gun still clutched tightly in my numb hands. Its movements were slow, almost methodical, each inch it covered seeming to drag the moment out, stretching the seconds into what felt like an eternity. The only sound breaking the oppressive silence was the ragged, desperate sound of my own breathing. As it drew nearer, I couldn't pull my gaze away from those hauntingly bright, crimson eyes. It was close now, so close I could almost reach out and touch the rippling darkness of its form. And yet, it didn't attack. It didn't lunge at me as I'd feared it might. It just stopped, hovering a few feet away, its luminous gaze locked on mine, a silent, profound scrutiny. Then, in a moment that made my heart skip a beat and my blood run cold, it shifted again. Its dark form flickered under the dim, crimson light of the moon, and I felt a piercing sensation, like an icy needle, directly behind my eyes, then spreading, coiling through my veins. It was as if its very presence was seeping into me, an unseen, unheard connection. It was a disturbing sight, watching the entity change its shape, becoming even more indistinct, more like a living shadow, a swirling vortex of deep red and black. It was as if it was trying to communicate in a language I couldn't comprehend, a language of pure essence and sensation. A chill ran down my spine as I stood there, waiting for it to make the next move, for the full force of its being to fall upon me. But it didn't. It just watched me, a silent, ancient observer in the crimson night, and the internal coldness in my veins deepened, spread, a faint shimmer of red sparking at the very edge of my vision. After what felt like an eternity but was likely only minutes, the entity began to retreat. Its form slowly dissolved into the darkness until only the red eyes remained, hovering like twin embers. And then they faded away, disappearing into the night, leaving me alone in the crimson-lit forest, feeling irrevocably altered. As I stood there, the adrenaline slowly dwindling away, I realized I was shaking, not just from cold but from a profound, internal tremor. With a deep, shuddering breath, I lowered the flashlight. The encounter left me with more questions than answers. What is the entity? Why is it here? Why didn't it harm me? Or had it? The coldness, the faint crimson shimmer in my sight, with the dawn still hours away, I turned back toward the tower. My legs felt like jelly, and it took all my remaining strength to climb the stairs back to the watch room. Once inside, I collapsed onto the cot, my body drained of energy. But sleep didn't come. I kept replaying the encounter in my mind, those glowing red eyes, that shifting, faceless form seared into my memory. Exhausted, I lay there, my mind buzzing with the surreal encounter. For a moment, I considered calling Sam again, filling him in on the recent turn of events, on the horrifying shift. But I stopped myself, knowing it would be useless. Sam didn't believe me the first time, why would he now? Besides, I couldn't quite find the words to describe what had just happened, what I had felt hours past, and the adrenaline slowly wore off, replaced by a profound fatigue, but sleep remained elusive. Every distant sound from the forest below caused me to jump, the usual nighttime sounds of the wilderness now seeming menacing, imbued with a new, dark meaning. As the night deepened, I decided to step back out onto the balcony. A breeze rustled the treetops below, the sound eerily soothing, almost mocking. I gazed out into the forest, the flashlight in my hand casting a narrow beam into the depths of the darkness. I saw nothing unusual. The glowing red eyes were nowhere to be seen, the entity itself absent. Was it truly gone? Or was it just lurking in the shadows, watching from a distance, its presence a cold echo within me? Suddenly, the tranquil silence of the night was shattered by a distant howl. I tensed, my grip tightening around the flashlight. I shone the light toward the source of the noise. It was just a wolf, its eyes glowing in the beam of my flashlight, but they weren't red. They were the usual natural color. Was the forest returning to normal? Or was it just the calm before another storm? As the first rays of dawn started to seep into the forest, bathing it in soft, golden light, I breathed a deep, shuddering sigh of relief. I had made it through the night, and the forest for now seemed calm. The animals, their eyes no longer glowing red, moved with a natural ease. There was a sense of normalcy, and I clung to it, seeking comfort in the familiar sights and sounds. Despite what happened, I had a job to do with the coming daylight. My fears subsided enough to let me focus on my work. I spent the day in my tower, scanning the forest below with binoculars, checking for smoke or any signs of fire. But as the day progressed, I couldn't help but remember the bleeding trees. I decided to venture back into the forest, driven by a mix of lingering fear and an almost desperate curiosity. The axe in my hand felt heavy as I approached a small fir tree, my palms sweating as I remembered the dark red sap from the day before. I made a small cut, bracing myself for what might come. But instead of the eerie red sap, the tree bled the usual clear liquid. Relief, like a physical wave, flooded me. It was as if the forest had truly returned to its normal state. The animals behaved naturally, the trees bled clear sap, and the entity was nowhere to be seen. Yet, as the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, I couldn't help but feel a lingering sense of unease. The entity could return, I knew that. The quiet day might just be a break, a deceptive pause. As darkness blanketed the forest, I watched with bated breath, bracing for the same crimson hue, the same menacing glow. But tonight the moon looked normal. It hung high in the sky, bathing the forest in its soft, natural light. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their forms casting long, ordinary shadows on the ground. The forest was beautiful, calm, and almost serene. Hours passed with no sign of the entity. No glowing red eyes piercing the darkness. No ominous form hovering at the edge of the forest. I kept scanning the landscape below, half expecting it to materialize out of nowhere to prove itself still there. But the night remained uneventful. A genuine sense of relief washed over me. Maybe it was over. Maybe the entity had moved on. Or maybe it was never really there, a figment of my isolation, a trick of the light. The thought was comforting, but deep down, I knew what I saw was real. Despite the tranquility, I couldn't shake off the lingering, insidious fear. The entity's absence didn't mean it was gone. It might return tonight, tomorrow, or any other night. The uncertainty kept me on edge, a constant, low thrum beneath my skin. But for now, all I could do was appreciate the peace. For the first time since starting this job, I truly took in the simple, breathtaking beauty of the wilderness around me. The tranquil night, the rustling leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, all wrapped in the soft, silver glow of the moon. The night passed without incident. No red sap, no glowing eyes, and no mysterious entity. Just a normal night in a remote fire watchtower in Alaska. The summer went by quickly after that night. As days turned into weeks, the forest remained calm. Its eerie crimson nights were a thing of the past. The animals went about their lives, their eyes back to their natural colors. The trees bled clear sap just as they should. And the entity, it never returned. As I went about my daily routine, scanning the horizon for smoke, the memory of the entity and the strange happenings started to fade. They became distant, like fragments of a dream growing dimmer with each passing day. Yet they never truly disappeared. They lingered at the back of my mind, an unsettling reminder of the nights I'd experienced. But something else lingered too, something that had begun to manifest more subtly. I would catch glimpses of faint, unexplainable crimson at the periphery of my vision, or feel a strange, cold hum deep within my bones, a sensation like static electricity that would rise and fall with the wind or the moon. I started noticing things about myself. A heightened awareness, a feeling of being too deeply connected to the sounds and movements of the forest, even when I wasn't actively listening. My dreams became vivid, filled with deep red light and the feeling of ancient earth shifting beneath me. I finished my job as the summer drew to a close. Packing my belongings, I took one last, long look at the Raven's Tooth Fire Tower that had been my home for the past few months. It was a strange feeling, leaving this place, a mix of relief and a profound, chilling sense of an ending that was truly a beginning. As I drove away, the gravel road crunching beneath my tires, I took one last look at the receding forest. It was just a forest now, no different than any other, a vast green expanse under a pale blue sky. Yet I knew better. I knew what it could be, and what it had done. I looked into the rear-view mirror, catching my own reflection. For a fleeting second, just as the last towering fir disappeared from view, I saw it. A faint, internal crimson flicker deep within my own eyes. It wasn't the reflection of light. It was a nascent glow, a spark of the forest's own ancient, chilling essence. The entity hadn't vanished. It had simply found a new vessel. And as the miles passed, I realized with a cold, creeping certainty that the true chilling twist wasn't what I had seen in the forest, but what the forest had placed within me. What part of Kale's story gave you the most chills? Let me know in the comments.